Hello, everyone, and thank you for attending today's HP Wolf Security webinar. Before we begin, I want to cover a few housekeeping items. At the bottom of your audience console are multiple application widgets that you can use. If you have any questions during the webinar, you may submit them in the Q&A box, and we will answer those at the end of the presentation. You can also expand your slide area by clicking the maximum icon in the top right of the slide viewer. If you have any technical difficulties, please click on the Help widget. And at the very end of the webinar, if you don't mind taking a moment to fill out our survey, we would greatly appreciate it. And without further ado, I would like to introduce our presenter, Stephen Pieraldi.
Hello, thank you. So today we're going to cover a little bit of a use case, a little bit about the product, and a little bit about why it's important to have in a comprehensive stack in security. We're going to talk a little bit about a use case, and we're going to discuss what tends to be some market objections and some of the operational risks that businesses encounter. So ultimately, what we provide is a highly customizable and policy-driven product. And why that's important is because today's landscape is ever-changing. And the high level of targeting that's going against individual users is really getting past the gates of the kingdom, so to speak. They know that they can't necessarily succeed by force. So what they do is they go around and they find some other way of motivating a user to do something, in effect creating a manipulation of that user, and it's a 0-day, because what happens is their behavior circumvents everything that you have put in place as a rule. Now, typically, if you look at a good example, in this case, this manufacturing use case, lots of employees, just like our company, who we eat our own dog food, we use this product ourselves. And we're in many countries, lots of languages, a whole bunch of different ways of things going around. So if you're thinking about a risk tolerance and your risk profile, and you're trying to select the right tools in a layered strategy, and then use zero trust, you start to build a story that gets more complicated, not simpler. Specifically, where English might be a second language, or localization's not clear, or the individuals haven't necessarily had good hygiene or training. Any one of these things can circumvent the best interest and efforts of absolutely any company who set up a layered strategy for security. Now, one of the questions that always come up is, I have a whole bunch of these things, and as I've referred to in the opening of this seminar, is that, sorry, sometimes I teach and I get whether I'm in front of a class or not. There's many of different ways that you end up layering in your strategies. And we're not competing against these products as listed in the slide. What we do is something very different. And HP in general has the opportunity to provide both a hardware solution and an enterprise level solution that works across anyone's hardware. So for us, helping individuals and companies be successful across a number of different devices and provide a comprehensive security solution is the ultimate goal. So when you look at your layered strategy, you have to look at us as a complement and additive to the process because it's user focused. Now, let's go over a quick timeline about how we got here. The I Love You virus was essentially a harmless event. It was a painful event and it caused some difficulty, but it wasn't harmful. But as it developed, it prompted, and each one of these line items shows you how there's a progression from developing a reasonable policy or a government-influenced oversight against a particular event. So you have the I Love You virus, which creates a SOC event. But then there was PCI, and customers and companies have been compromised at each level, even though these events have been put in place. So it goes with companies like Target and their PCI requirements being violated. Then you get militarized products, and those things like Stuxnet have been deployed and redeployed in organizations. Again, user-driven actions. Sony was the first example of a weaponized model where North Korea felt offended and went after a company with a product. And now we have this pandemic, which has caused people to shift their work environment and expand the footprint outside of the castle walls for corporations. And ultimately, they've figured out, and no, I say they, the bad guys, have figured out that ransomware is a very effective tool, if not to extort money, but to extort the company in behavior. So when you monetize something like ransomware, you're really looking at a whole different scope of engagement. And ultimately, it's not even about the money sometimes. It's a behavior change. So if they can get someone in your organization to create this event, and that event pushes you into a regulatory breach, well, now you've got a serious problem, because any one of the things that I list here have influenced or created directly some regulatory oversight. And today, in the terms of ransomware, we have yet to have that regulation oversight. So you're really in a gray zone if you're a security professional trying to solve this problem. We're seeing now that the regulation that follows might be something like reporting to the federal government on every single breach. And that's how you can see these things develop. So the people who have set this up, and again, we're talking about all the compliance standards and all the things that have happened and brought us to this point, leave us at a new horizon, a new event place, where without specific definition, like if you're saying, I'm going to comply with DPR, I'm going to comply with HIPAA, we're saying we have users that we need to control and test and influence to behave correctly. And yet, that's not working. So people are still clicking on emails. They're still misidentifying links. They're still accepting downloads because, frankly, the attackers are becoming so clever that it's very hard to tell, even for professionals, what is authentic or is not authentic. Now, you can look at the data, and it spells it all out for you. Breaches are really just coming from individuals now, and the numbers are huge. And if you want to protect those individuals, you can do one of a couple things. You can install more tools, you can train, and you can hope. And we like to use our product to eliminate the risk of hoping that somebody's going to do the right thing. I don't know why I have 2 slides in there. Okay, so one of the things you can answer this question with is the social engineering issue, that if your risk tolerance is that you're going to accept a certain amount of potential risk from users working through their daily events, and sometimes things will happen, well, we're a good solution, because on our enterprise product, if they go to Gmail or they go outside of your firewalls or they're interacting with the web in a normal way, or in the worst case, like this recent email violation with Outlook, is that they compromise the Exchange server and they use techniques to move attacks through a registered server to an individual, and it looks like it's 100% legitimate. So you can accept those risks, or you can start to mitigate them by interposing these kinds of tools to do certain specific actions, enabling the user to take the time, be confident, look at the potential, and if they click on it, feel secure that, in our case, we're isolating that behavior so that they do not become a breach. So what do we actually address when we talk about isolation? This is a huge eye chart, and of course, following a question and answer period, or if you'd like to reach out to us directly, we can give you examples and talk about what these little boxes represent. But the ultimate idea is, if you have a product that's interacting in your system today, EDR has a certain level of coverage that you can trust. And there are other products that highlight these red areas that talk about what exactly you can stop or protect based on detection. But as we know, detection doesn't cover all of the issues. It doesn't necessarily come in a timely fashion. So detection doesn't necessarily always keep up with the bad guys. So through isolation, especially endpoint and application-based targeting, we can isolate individuals' behavior, allowing them to therefore leave the rest of the things to the tools that do their best work. But in the case that there's a breach within a browser, as an example, you can use our tools to prevent them. So what are you trying to protect exactly? Well, it's this circle of events where you have things that are run by Flash or Java. Now, IE, for instance, has been depreciated, but many companies can't get rid of IE because you have to use them for some legacy application that was written specifically for the IE framework. Now, we'd all like to see it go away, and we'd all like to believe that Microsoft is going to enforce it, but we have seen that it doesn't work that way, just like with Windows 11. You can enforce TPM, which is a trusted platform management system, with a chip, but it doesn't really do much to define, or now they're actually giving examples where you might allow them to, okay, a couple of machines will let them ride and write an exemption as not to allow the TPM. So in all cases, you can see where through a series of events, any one of these actions on the right can happen to you. Again, it can happen in a driver patch. It can happen with a DNS reroute. There's all sorts of different ways that executables can be manipulated. And ultimately, detection doesn't activate unless there is an activation. So if you have something embedded in a document, like a Word or Excel or PowerPoint, and then you activate that, well, now you have, in effect, have a 0 day in your system, and you better hope that your detection is up to the game in order to stop it. But if it isn't, or it's gotten past those layers, we're isolating those things so that you can then capture the information that occurred and dispose of this, what we use as a microVM technology. So I went through this very quickly with the intent that I want to make sure we have lots of time to discuss what our product does and how it does it. And we can cover specific issues, and I'll go back and forth in the deck. I was going to show you a video, but I just realized now that I should have given them the video to show them because it's driven through this platform. So we can't show you an exact demonstration of the 3-minute video that we provide, but we can provide you a link to YouTube so that you can watch it at your leisure later. So at this point, I'd like to turn it over to questions because I think that's the most important piece. And I just realized, do we have a feedback so people can ask, or do I just read them out? I guess I just read them out.
Yeah, I can go ahead and ask some of the questions
sure.
if you would like.
I'm not getting them. I'm sorry. I don't want to hit refresh and lose my screen.
Nope, you are totally fine. So how does HP Wolf Enterprise Security differ than other endpoint security solutions?
Perfect. Great question. So let's go back to this chart. What you have is different products are built for different purposes. Specifically, if you're looking at endpoint detection, detection relies on a certain chain of events where, especially with virus detection, that you'll see an event in the wild, and the product, AV product, will catalog that. People will have identified it. They will give a signature to it, and then they'll have to develop, in some cases, a special modification to their detection engine in order to read where that threat is resident, and then load that signature and profile into the system and link them to an action. Now, R, remediation, is added to many things. Remediation means that you do the next step, which is you then put it in some place. So on the endpoint, a lot of the products are designed to both detect and then remediate, which means isolate them. So they can mark the file, they can dispose of the file, they can put the file in a special place that's hidden away in some manner. But at the end of the day, the thing that's the concern has already been placed and is already in play. Now, that is on typical products. You can have more exotic products. In fact, here at HP, we use all sorts of products. You have CrowdStrike, you have Mimecast, you have all sorts of products, some that work on the endpoint and some that try to anticipate a breach ahead of the endpoint. So Mimecast has its service that captures things, reviews them, opens them, detonates them, sandboxes outside of the process, and then deposits them on the user machine in some manner. And then the user has to be trusted that they can look at the content, or it's redirected to that service. But let's assume for a second that you're in a device that isn't connected in that manner and is out of sync with whatever system that is updating it. Well, again, we're different in that all of these conditions that I've described are captured within a VM. So as the user opens up a particular document or a transaction, the malware is actually fooled into thinking that it's a viable resource, a viable place to work. And it detonates. And then you see the results, and you can then delete it by simply closing the VM. And once you close that, it eliminates all of the content within it. So that gives you a nice clean slate to work from. In addition, if you compare it to other behavior-based type systems, these behavior type detection systems can throw a lot of false positives in your network, confusing your SIM. So your SIEM, however you want to say it. And when they get confused by having too many alerts, in effect, you're starting to diminish the quality of your detection scheme. In addition to that, those things have to have seen it once or twice in order to understand that it's an anomaly. So they watch your behavior, they see something new, and they say, oh, okay, we should do something with that. Again, potentially raising the signal to noise ratio in your control plane. Well, that's not really what you want. For us, we, again, isolate those transactions, dispose of them, and then produce a report to say, hey, look, here's what happened, and maybe you want to go look into that. In our use case that we pointed out here for this large company, manufacturing company, those particular incidents, we saw one in the test phase. This was for the CISO who was actually looking at our product. When the CISO noticed it was a bad idea, a bad item, captured it, and then took the information and sent it to their threat desk, it took another day for that information to actually be mapped and then verified and then deployed as a solution through other providers. So in that case, we had a very concrete use case where risk tolerance was low, 0 transactions could be breached. This person observed it and then went to report it, and it took quite a long time for it to reach the system. So we're very different in that instead of having these points protected very well by another device, and we do recommend you retain those devices in our application, you're still going to be subject to a breach. What's the next question?
Is HP Wolf Enterprise Security exclusive to HP, and does it support other PC systems?
Perfect question. See, this is why I like the question periods. We can go back through the slides and we get all these great directed answers. So the answer on our complete product line is that we, as Enterprise, are agnostic to the hardware. So we can be on any device as long as it's a Windows-based platform. On the other hand, if you have a greater concern for all of your hardware platform security or your supply chain security in terms of was the product ordered, created, delivered, and shipped to me correctly, and that I want it to boot safely and I want it to be verified, and all of these things are hardware specific to every vendor. So every hardware vendor has their own version of this, but from a completely clean perspective, from a green board design all the way through our cloud execution in the hardware side, we have a very unique value proposition. But in the enterprise, again, we can be across any device.
Awesome. And how does this impact end user experience?
Great question. Okay. So very little, amazingly. One of the things, and I don't mean that to be flattery, I mean, one of the things that's really important is that when you look at an endpoint system and you base it on detection, the utilization has to be somewhere. There has to be some basic compute function that is constantly looking at what's going on the system. An AV system, and we all had lived through, I mean, those of us who are old enough lived through the days of Symantec first starting out, and all the ways that they tried to weave their way into the system so they could detect absolutely every transaction. Every one of those things has a cost. We're very different in that way. We apply our solutions on a need basis. So we activate when an untrusted event has occurred, and then we wind down immediately after that event. So we have a queue that we watch, and when an untrusted document or a link that has not previously been seen, or you can specify it and customize it any way you want through a number of different conditions, these settings allow you to specify your user experience. The benefit, though, is that it only happens when required and otherwise is idle. So from a basic framework, our micro VMs are initialized with your core infrastructure that's already in place on your system, different than other VM companies, which require a fresh install, for instance. If you're going to have a VM running and it's going to have Word in it, you're going to have another copy of Word. We don't work that way. So we pull up the resources into the master, and then every VM that comes out of that is a child. And it has all of the attributes of its parent without all the costs of all the pieces and parts. It also allows you then to fool these malware attempts into transactions that you can then fully understand and capture for reporting purposes.
Perfect. Are you concerned that users can't determine malicious content?
Yeah, very. We're seeing, again, going back to this slide, which is one of the slides that I think spells it out most acutely, is that as you look through how users behave and you think about them in context to the regulations that have started, and we can look at simple things. For instance, card skimmers. You have somebody go to a supermarket, and for the first time you see card skimming. Somebody puts a reader on that device, they skim the information, everybody gets fooled, and the information is stolen. That seems pretty obvious, and you could tell people, well, watch out for card skimmers. But as we've seen, they're pretty innocuous, and sometimes they're already built into the machine, delivered from a suspicious source in the supply chain. So when the user acts, they can't tell the difference. And we're kind of getting into that too now with the way that transactions work through links and credential theft and a bunch of other things that we protect. And the purpose of that is that they want the users to be fooled. So they use more and more clever techniques, and then companies respond. So without a framework, like with card skimmers, certifying the machine, verifying that the machine doesn't have an attachment to it, and all these things that users would not otherwise be able to determine, they now have the opportunity to then shield those users in advance of any regulation or corrective measures. So for us, we can isolate those users' behavior and prevent more onerous things happening. So let me give you an example of something that seems to be more ominous. Without clear tools or guidance, some companies have gone to the idea that they're going to train employees as much as they can, then test them, pen test the employee, and send them things. We've all had this happen. They get in emails, and we get false download requests, or we get something from our CFO saying, hey, here's a purchase order you need to fill out. And it's really the company trying to test the employee's performance. Well, the truth is that employers now are starting to consider ways to regulate that on their own, which means that employees get marks on their record. There are consequences to the marks on their record. And really, the truth is that in this market today with these kind of stats, the attackers are very clever about this. And they're even using artificial intelligence to craft language from other stolen content to make your email look legitimate and valid. And when that happens, all the testing in the world won't save you. Users just won't be able to do it. So yeah, I'm very concerned about this particular issue.
What is the impact to productivity of the device?
So productivity is a tough question in terms of there are so many variables. Where we target, unlike other solutions, and in fact, this product was previously called Bromium. It was acquired into Hewlett Packard, HP, and in that process, the basic underpinning of the product was much like any VM product: insulate and isolate absolutely everything, every transaction. And just like detection, that has a cost. So in today's product deployment, you'll find it's very targeted. If with this configuration, you can change almost every way that a user might interact with the system. So in some cases, we're going to be very transparent to the system because we're not going to be in play. If it's a document that comes from a trusted server through a trusted person, and it's defined in policy, we're not going to activate, even if it's on Word. But if it comes from pretty much anywhere else, we're going to get in between, and we're going to open up this VM. We're going to isolate Word, and the transactions that occur within Word are all going to be isolated. And the benefit there is that in that specific instance, you're only going to have our system running against that one piece of software. Not going to be trying to look at the entire OS and all of the other things going on in the OS. But should you, let's say, for instance, click on a link in an email from Outlook and it goes to a browser, we can choose to control the browser instance, we can control the browser tab, or we can open you up in a special Chromium-based secure browser so that really all you're doing is protecting one transaction at a time in a sequential way. And then when that's finished, it's gone. So our endpoint drain on both a task manager basis and on a user productivity basis is quite low on a typical install.
How many non-Windows devices do you have in fleet?
No. Yeah, so we're a Windows-based product, pretty much top to bottom. We have looked at, and in the past have had a Apple Macintosh client. We don't today. But we are always looking at the opportunity, and as we see exploits rise or population of mixed environments rise, we're definitely going to look at that as we have in the past.
And this might be the last question. How does HP Wolf Enterprise Security fit within a customer's existing security infrastructure?
Great question. So we try through our customization, and it's a policy-driven framework. So there's a controller, and that controller is configured in a specific manner to start with. And then after that, the user, whoever is configuring it for the enterprise, has the opportunity then to spell out exactly how the behavior should be, what the workflows are. They can do that with the out-of-the-box settings, or they can do it with highly customized settings. In some cases, we go all the way to military spec, which locks down the system in every manner. USB ports, any kind of password entry, everything's in a secure browser. So you can have a wide range of behaviors configured to suit your needs. And therefore, layering it in is actually much better than a lot of competitor products, especially in any of the R products, any of the remediation products, because we're not first trying to detect everything, so we're not invasive that way. We're not trying to replace certain things like your existing AV or EDR. And what we're doing is allowing you to place user behavior forward and system behavior optimized. So if there's a particular transaction that is something that it's at risk for, or you just have a certain enclave of things that you want protected and trusted, but everything else is unprotected, you can weave our solution in by domain, by document type, by a specific kind of ingress application. For instance, if you have a very old legacy application that has to be maintained, you can specify that as a specific channel within the product. So integrating with an existing stack, and especially a zero trust framework, is really our specialty. And it takes a little work to set up, but within a couple of weeks, most companies have tuned themselves in nice and tight. And the users sometimes don't even know the product's active. And that's really the best situation. especially with C-suite individuals, or sometimes your front-end receptionists or a call center. You can't have too much stuff going in front of them and between them in terms of workflow. So our product can be configured, for instance, that you don't want a blue border surrounding an encapsulated document or an encapsulated web page. No problem. We can turn it off. Just one example.
Awesome. It looks like that was our last question.
All right. Well, since we have some time, I think we're committed here for almost an hour, right?
Yes, that's correct.
Yeah, perfect. I just want to make sure that I always like this nice middle piece where we can answer some questions. Let me talk a little bit about some of the other things if I can. Is that all right with you?
You got it.
All right. So let's take a look at this list again and think about what I said earlier, because if you hear it more, first off, it sinks in better. But I think this is a critical element of why it's important today to look at different strategies. And we see this in the news every single day. I mean, yeah, just this morning, actually, I was reading an article that suggested that there's no reason to have AV anymore on your system because everyone has determined that they can create very small adjustments in the code and bypass detection. And the truth is that's actually happening. What's happening today, and what leads you through this example here of a bunch of different events that then created some form of oversight, that then created a series of tools, that then created an opportunity for customers to use tools that are out in the marketplace. There's one theme here, and that is that if you think back to 1997, we were talking about hand-coded software that was very specific to task. And yet we had the first parts of the web, and the first time that we saw applications that can move around without necessarily being hand coded on a very specific enterprise design specification. So what happened is, of course, the criminals moved with that opportunity, and as they moved through time, what they started to do was capitalize. And Stuxnet is actually a really good example. Stuxnet was a military attempt to go after, as we all know now, certain things in the infrastructure, nuclear infrastructure, to wipe out centrifuges. And it was a very special problem. That was even more important. That problem had to be that it had to get into an air gap, and it had to go through a USB drive. Well, once you saw that happen, there was a lot of custom code written that took a lot of time, and then Stuxnet has become a public tool now. It's out there on the dark web for sale. And you might think, well, yeah, so these things have always been out there. Well, the truth is now that those things are commoditized. And through commoditization, the criminal elements have essentially a library, open source library, or a purchasable library of malware. And they've taken actually really old malware, stuff that we thought, we've got tons of tools that protect against that. And they've modified it ever so slightly to get by those tools. Now, you might think, oh, that's just a matter of more hard coding, more effort. But think about it. Now we have even more advanced tools, modifying tools. And these benefits in terms of coding speed and coding execution and artificial intelligence that we use on the white hat side to create more and better tools, now they're being used on the dark side. And what took months to iterate can take hours. So if you think that you have a tool that, look, I have tools that detect everything. But if those tools can be fooled, and the only defense was more time, well, now we're running out of time. So in any case, these things can come at us more quickly, more well-formed, and more highly targeted because of commoditization in the marketplace and the enhanced tools that are getting into the hands of the criminals. And this is allowing for a very new landscape, which is why you'll see articles that say we don't need AV anymore. But you could always use an isolation technology. Did we get a new question? Nope.
We don't have any other questions yet. Nope.
No more? Okay, good.
No more questions.
I'll move on then. I see we still have an audience, so I'll still go. Okay, so let's talk about another thing that comes up when you talk about what's the point of isolation and why the endpoint. The endpoint's important because people have determined, attackers have determined, that by going through a standard pathway, it's not only difficult, but it's probably not economically viable. As I mentioned at the last slide, we talked about a commoditization being at play, which means that whatever product was being used is now essentially free or inexpensive and available in a very wide area. And what's happened here is that they've taken these ideas and said, well, let's get to the endpoint, because we know that if there's the endpoint is out of sync with the host, that means your corporation, your network, being on a VPN, whatever that condition is, and they can come through that endpoint and essentially get a beachhead to come back into the organization. Well, that's a very custom and very difficult process to do prior to this time in history. Now, this particular approach has gained a lot of strength because just small malformations, which is why it's called malware, can both obscure and impact an organization all the way through in any way, shape, or form. We used to see this in, let's say, Microsoft Word with a macro. The macro would be loaded, it would execute, it would make a call out, it would do some things, but that's all endpoint based. So what we used to do is simply say, okay, well, let's detect if something hit the file system that we can then scan, identify, remediate. Well, but what if you don't even want that? You just don't want anything to happen that way. Well, you want an isolation strategy that will allow you to then protect not only the transaction and user productivity. In our case, if you look at, again, we'll point to a demonstration video we have online so you can watch it at your leisure, but in our enterprise product, when somebody activates a macro, for instance, or a machine-driven link that goes outside through a document, hits a website, creates a transaction, and comes back, these things are going to be shielded because you're in an isolated environment. And one of the things you'll see when you watch the video is that we have this idea that you're looking at our Word document and you're seeing the opportunity to edit that document. Well, you can save that document in a protected state on the system. You could also print that document out to a PDF. And if you look at it, when you're doing those transactions, you think that you were inside of your host, whatever that is. You'd see your file, you'd see your save as, you'll see your directories, you'll see your network drivers, and you'll think, wow, I'm pretty much connected to my host. Truth is, you're not. We've emulated all those functions through our integration with Windows so that you're shielded even from that. And that gets back to an earlier question. How are we impacting user performance? Well, I'd say we're not, because in this case, the user doesn't actually know that they're in a micro VM and they don't have to do any extraordinary work in order to remain productive. Specifically, if they want to do a file include, or they want to take a copy of some of the content, let's say it's a resume, as you'll see in the demo, and they want to say, well, I now see this resume has something attached to it or a link to it or through it that is causing something to happen bad on my system. So instead of shutting down the system, slamming the laptop shut, unplugging it, and hoping to God that we just didn't have it go any farther than that, you can actually go in, copy out some information and say, look, I don't know why this document is bad, but I'd like somebody else to look up who this person is that we got the resume from. And you can take it, copy it, paste it, and all of that happens without the user having to think any more than I want to get my job done. Everything else is taken care of by us. Then they shut that document down. They can report it to their alert desk, and everything goes on from there. So in a lot of ways, it's really important to understand why both we maintain user productivity, we help with what is in effect a 0-day inspired on a user, and why these other products, although they're excellent and should be in place, can be fooled through a much more available and commoditized tool set today. And in the worst case, like this last compromise through Outlook, through Exchange, they're actually in your server, and they're forwarding and sending copy content from an authorized source. So then what do you do? It gets very complicated very quickly. So layering us in with this framework allows you to do a number of things. And again, not to mention the fact that if you chose to do our entire stack through our dedicated hardware offers you a chip-to-cloud level of security that even, frankly, I don't think our closest competitors provide a similar service, in that we are directly engineering those components. We're not just simply adding pieces or parts. They're integral to the design from the start. Whew, that was a lot. So there being no more questions, although I see we still have a good deal of people on the call, I'll give it another couple minutes and then we'll see where we stand. Let me go back to this. So this slide starts to lay out a story. It's going to fail on me. Let's see. Build and build. So I mentioned earlier that these elements here, all of the different components, are going to be detectable components that other products may or may not catch, depending on the configuration and the settings that you have. Most importantly, though, this all requires updating, constant and vigilant updating in the system. So I'll kind of close with that, in that one of the most difficult aspects of fighting cybersecurity is user behavior, which we've talked a lot about in this event today. And we're also talking about DevOps and supporting SecOps and all the different kind of ops that happen, and trying to make sure that all of these things are consistently updated in a manner that get the detection you need and want at every point in the chain of events that occur. And the truth is that when you look at the amount of attacks that happen and the way that they happen, it becomes obvious that one of the best defenses is in fact simply isolating, which is why a lot of other products, and we'll take Mimecast as an example, have chosen to isolate outside of the system, encapsulate everything, send it to you, verify it, and then route you through it. But I think everyone can agree that if you go that route, I don't know that anyone would want all of their email every day going through Mimecast. Sometimes, we have a very efficient system, and we could have a number of delays between the time that the email was sent and the time that we are able to interact with it. And that's because of a lot of issues, the amount of users, the amount of configuration items. And that gets me to my worst and most difficult problem. On one hand, you have a whole infrastructure and enterprise that requires updating, consistency, and execution around specific settings that are updated and accurate. It's very hard to keep up with that in general. Specifically, if you go around and say, well, the vendors decided to change some things, and those things change some settings, or they modify some conditional constraints. Your entire organization has to consistently manage those, update them, and get them to the system so that detection can consistently work. In our case, by establishing these micro VMs around transaction-based events, if somebody opens up a Word document, they're constantly protected. If they open up an Excel document, they're protected. And as long as they're protected and something occurs within that system, or a link is projecting them outside of that environment into some other environment, like searching the web, connecting to a resource document that otherwise they think is legitimate, but hidden in that malware or that redirect is something that's getting them to a different location that then slips in a little piece of malware that then detonates. Well, it's just too late. And there's no amount of updating or detection that's going to get that. So you're kind of at risk for a number of different things depending on your risk tolerance. Are you willing to accept that there's a lag between deployment of a detection solution and the execution of it? Or would you just rather isolate, and if you find something and the detection would have caught it anyway, fine. But at least your risk tolerance is managed. and the event caseload is low, so that you're not only capturing the event, but you're reducing the demand and the level of complexity that hits the SOC. Because at the end of the day, every one of our transactions creates more noise. And anywhere there's noise, which I think I'll close this section off with this little piece of reminder. Whenever you have a lot of noise, that's another opportunity for a particular attack framework. Look at DNS attacks. If you attack somebody and force them to go down, we thought that was the worst it could be, that you get all of these attacks on your system, and it forces your system to overload, and it shuts down. Well, then they came along and said, well, we're going to do that on PCs, and what we're going to do is we're going to get that system to basically be overwhelmed, and then we're going to slip some code in, and that was another kind of attack. And now what we're seeing is the same basic approach against users. And as we start throwing more things at the system, it's essentially the same thing. And that creates more noise at your security center. And the security center being overwhelmed with a ton of alerts already, and there's tons of technologies out there trying to solve that problem. You're just trying to weed through it. So attackers have figured that out. So now they're saying, well, you know what? All we have to do is create enough noise that we can get one user to click on our link, and we've got our passwords. And by the time that all of the analysis is done, you could be talking days, given the transaction level. So we've seen SOCs where the numbers just go skyrocketing. That's actually an indicator that you're probably being attacked, and that there's something going on, and you have to go hunt it down and find it. So I'm not sure whether I ever want to be back in that business where I'm on the defending side, having an alert waterfall hit me, and then I'm trying to pick out where the fish are in that waterfall. No, I think it's much easier just to say, look, I'll tell you what, I'll capture the whole entire reservoir, and I'll look through it when I have time. And if I find a couple fish, fantastic. All right, so that was the end of that segment. And we're just a couple of minutes in. Are we going to give some people back their free time in life? Or would you like me to answer another question? Or Amy, do you have anything you'd like to add?
It doesn't look like we have any questions that have come in.
Great. Well, okay, let's move to the closing comments then, if that's all right with you.
Of course.
Fantastic.
Stephen, thank you so much for taking the time and for a very enlightening presentation. If any of you would like to learn more about Wolf Security and how it can help strengthen cybersecurity protection in your company's environment, Insight's HPI BDM team is ready and happy to help. We'll be providing info on how to reach us along with a link for the recording of today's session. But Stephen, if you don't have anything else for us, that will conclude today's webinar, and we appreciate everyone's time and consideration today.
Absolutely, and enjoy the rest of your day and happy holiday.
You as well.
Bye-bye.